Hello folks, it's the Passenger again. Welcome to another one of my videos. We're in Grimsby. It's a Sunday morning in February 2023, and I'm going to continue on from the last one I made following the route of the former East Lincolnshire Railway through Grimsby. The first part was entitled Railways and Local History, or Grimsby Railways and Local History. So please check that one out on my channel. On that one we walked from Garden Street in Grimsby, where the line began, to here, which is Wintringham Road. We looked, as well as the remains of the railway, we looked at some of the aspects of local history. That's why I entitled it Grimsby Railways and Local History, including Edward Heneage, the venue where the rock band The Who played in Grimsby. And then at the end of it we wandered off onto Ainsley Street Wreck, which is a park that used to be a cemetery. So I'm going to continue in this one from Wintringham Road down to Weelsby Road. At least down when Alf is finished sniffing this post here. For anybody who hasn't watched part one, I'll just run through the history of the railway very quickly again. It was opened in 1848 by the East Lincolnshire Railway Company, who had been leased by the Great Northern Railway whilst the line was still under construction. So when it opened, it looked like a Great Northern line. The Great Northern ran the trains and provided the staff. But it ran from Grimsby down through Louth to Boston, and then you could get on to Spalding and Peterborough, and there was a service to London King's Cross for quite a number of years. The line lost its passenger service in 1970, and at the same time it was closed entirely beyond Louth, so it left a bit between Grimsby and Louth just for freight trains. The last of those operated in December 1980, and then in 1981 the line was declared closed and it was removed. A lot of it in Grimsby is now used to build the A16 Peaks Parkway Road, but there are still some remains of it. So as I say, in this bit we're going to go down from where I've just been at Wintringham Road to Weelsby Road. When the line was built, there were two roads for it to cross. All the rest of them were built afterwards. There was Wellholme Road and there was Weelsby Road, and both of them went across it on level crossings. I suspect if the Great Northern had built it, they would actually have put bridges in, but the East Lincolnshire put two level crossings in. And we're just going to look at the first one of those at Wellholme Road. So I'm here at Wellholme Road. I'm looking down towards Hainton Avenue. That's where the traffic lights are, just there. Hainton Avenue goes across left to right. If you come round to the left there was the tram terminus, and then when the trams were replaced by trolleybuses in the 1920s, the trolleybuses were extended along to Weelsby Road, and they would have gone across there left to right. I did a series called Tramming It, where I walked through the streets of Grimsby and Cleethorpes following the old tram and trolleybus routes, and Hainton Avenue was part one of that series, so check that one out if you're interested. Further along Wellholme Road in this direction, about a third of a mile or so up there, was the terminus of another line that went to the People's Park. It ran down Bargate to the People's Park, and that was part three of the Tramming It series. As you can see, the tram termini were very close together, and permission was actually granted at one point to join them together and have like a circular line, but the Great Northern Railway objected to it. They refused to allow the trams to cross over their level crossing, so it was never built. I suspect part of that was they were worried about the effect on their passenger service, of which more in a moment. So this is the site of level crossing on Wellholme Road. Opposite me is what's now called the old railway house, which was the crossing keeper's cottage. That's where the gentleman who opened and closed the level crossing gates in the early days would have lived. It's a lovely building, it really is. To say it was just a house for a fairly menial worker. But yeah, absolutely gorgeous. By the end of the 19th century, the level crossing had been mechanised. There was a little signal box put in called Hainton Street Signal Box. It was approximately here where this wall is. And it had some levers in it that controlled signals either side of the level crossing to stop trains from approaching if the gates were still closed across the road. It also had some levers to control some points, which were just up there. They led between the two lines, and they were for trains shunting in and out of various sidings. To the left up there were sidings for a power station, and to the right to a gasworks. We talked about those in part one. And then they also had a wheel in the signal box that you turned, and via a system of gears and linkages it opened or closed the level crossing gates. So as I say, the box was called Hainton Street. In 1905, December 1905, it was joined by a halt. In other words, a small station called Hainton Street Halt. It had a couple of low-level platforms there was a wooden shelter on the Louthbound platform, approximately where we're standing now. It was served initially by things called rail motors. They were self-propelled passenger carriages, a little steam engine built into one end, and they had retractable steps, so when it pulled in, the steps lowered down so you could get on or off, to or from the low platform. When they were replaced by conventional trains, they put a portable set of steps on the platform, and then the train guard would move them underneath a suitable door for people to climb up or down. As I said, the Holt opened in December 1905. It was closed temporarily on the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, but it reopened again a few months later, early on in 1940, and it remained open until 1961. That was quite an innings for a Holt like that. Obviously it's not far from Grimsby town centre, and normally where Holts or stations were close to town, they succumbed to bus competition or tram competition early on. Now, we spoke in part one about the fact that Grimsby had two town centres from the late 19th century onwards. It had the original one, known locally as Top Town, centred nowadays around Freshney Place shopping centre. But also when the East Marsh area was built in the 1860s, the area around Freeman Street became like another town centre, and that was known locally as Bottom Town. Now, the trams, the trolleybuses and the buses that later replaced them along Hayneston Avenue, they ran to Bottom Town. They went from Hayneston Avenue along Freeman Street to Ryby Square near the docks, whereas the trains from Hayneston Street Holt would have gone round into Grimsby Town Station, which was in Top Town. Just have a look along the Peaks Parkway in the direction we're going to go. Obviously not along the Peaks Parkway. The Holt and the signal box were both called Hayneston Street because they were named after Hayneston Avenue, but until around 1905 Hayneston Avenue was called Hayneston Street. It was renamed Hayneston Avenue because Edward Heneage, the local MP and property developer who developed this area, again we spoke about him in part one, but he was building some bigger and more exclusive houses along this part of Hayneston Avenue, and he thought Hayneston Street didn't really sound posh enough, so he renamed it Hayneston Avenue to make it sound a bit more exclusive. But the Holt and the signal box had already opened by then, and they retained the name Hayneston Street until they closed. The box was there until the last year of the operation of the line, about 1979 I think it closed. After that, the mechanism for the level crossing gates was removed, and they were opened and closed by the train guard. The train would stop, the guard would jump out, push the gates across the road, and then the train would go across and the guard would open the gates again. The box itself survived until 1990 in a disused state when it was set on fire by arsonists, but the lever frame out of it is down at Loughborough on the Lincolnshire Railway. They've put a heritage steam line on part of this route towards Louth, as I say, at Loughborough. They're currently extending it towards the outskirts of Louth, so wish them every success with that. So yeah, we're going to walk along towards Weelsby Road. We're on Peaksfield Avenue, or we're coming onto it. Now, up and down the country, there are lots of roads like this where there's a new road that only have one side, but this one only ever had one side. It was built after the railway, and so it was built fronting onto the railway, and then you've got Highfield Avenue on the other side. For any fans of Highfield Avenue, we're going to go on there in a bit. But yeah, there probably was room to fit the other side of the street in, but Edward Heneage was worried about the possibility of sparks from steam locomotives landing on the roofs and setting fire to the houses, so he only built one side to each of these roads and a little pathway along. Originally the pathway was owned by Edward Heneage and then the Heneage estate. Edward Heneage died in 1922 and all his properties were left to his estate. The Heneage estate still owned a lot of them until the end of the 1980s and the early 1990s. I believe they've sold them all now. A quick Google search for Heneage estates doesn't reveal anything, so they've all been sold on either to owner-occupiers or to other landlords. As they were sold, the bit of path in front of them became owned by the houses, and of course the idea was that the householders would pay for the repairs themselves if it needed repairing. They didn't do that, so more of that in it a little bit. The railway itself was on a small embankment a few feet high, just to raise it above the level of any flooding. This area used to flood quite frequently, so it was on a small embankment. That gave more room than normal. Normally if you try and build a road along a railway line there isn't enough width, but because of the little embankments, because obviously the sides of the embankment slope downwards and the bottom of the embankment's wider than the top, so they demolished the embankment and that gave me enough width to build the road without having to demolish any houses. Didn't demolish two, and they were at Weelsby Road, and that was just to build a slip road. The actual road itself didn't need to demolish any. When the railway closed, the bit of embankment in front of the houses was often taken over by them, sometimes officially. Some of the houses bought the little strip of embankment from the British Railways Board, and others just kind of took it over unofficially. When they wanted to build the road, the council bought the embankments back from either the householders or the British Railways Board, so they could demolish it, and they also bought the path so they could put it into a reasonable order because they were worried about the condition of it. So we're just coming up now to Patrick Street, where there's an underpass. Now Patrick Street's a bit unusual. You'll see from the underpass that there's enough width and height to get road vehicles under it. In railway days it would have been a metal girder bridge like the ones further back, where it's been replaced with this concrete bridge faced in brick that we're going to see very shortly. But you can see there's just about enough width and depth to get road vehicles under, but they never did. It was only ever a pedestrian underbridge. I've got the old maps from 1906, it just shows it as a pedestrian walkway. So Patrick Street has always been in two halves. Got half of it there going along across Hainton Avenue and down to Convermore Road. And then if we come under the underpass, you've got a stub of it there that leads up to the People's Park. There's not much left of the old bridge. There's a couple of bits of brickwork that look like they could be a little bit older, but not much. It's more or less fully been replaced by that one. So now we're going to go on Highfield Avenue for the final bit down to Weelsby Road. I'll talk about Weelsby Road as we're going because, as you know, I normally do these videos on a Sunday morning quite early on, so there's not as much traffic noise. But there seems to be a lot of traffic about already today, so Weelsby Road's very busy, usually. So if I talk too much there, you won't be able to hear me. So I'll tell you the story of Weelsby Road as we're going along. As I said earlier, it was one of the two roads that were here when the railway was built, so it got a level crossing. Now Weelsby Road nowadays is part of the A46, a major trunk road that ends up eventually, it starts at Cleethorpes, but it goes all the way down to Bath in Somerset. So it's a long, long road. Quite early on in the development of road transport, it was becoming very busy. But as early as 1914, the Great Northern Railway became concerned about the possible safety implications of having a level crossing there. It was getting very busy with road traffic. So they looked at building a bridge. Unfortunately, the First World War then broke out. So it all got shelved, and after the war they had other priorities, so it never happened. The Great Northern became part of the London North Eastern Railway in 1923. In the early 1930s, a campaign group was set up of local residents. This area, these two roads that we've just seen, Highfield Avenue and Peaksfield Avenue, they were built in the late 1800s by Edward Heneage, but this is about as far as his development got. This end of Hainton Avenue, beyond the area developed by Edward Heneage, and the streets around, they were developed in the 1920s. And when they developed them, they built sort of semi-detached houses, a few detached, but mainly semi-detached. And obviously they weren't built by Heneage, he died in 1922, as I said earlier on. So yeah, there were quite a lot of local residents by the early 1930s. They became concerned about how busy the crossing was, and they set up a campaign group to have it replaced with a bridge. And they used words like it was a death trap, it was an accident waiting to happen. And we tend to think of these kind of campaign groups as a modern phenomenon, but this wasn't. It was over 90 years ago. You know, the language they used was quite modern as well. Anyway, the campaign bore fruit in 1933, April 1933. They began work to dig a bridge out. They dug the road out as they did further back so they could put the bridge in. Unlike further back where they were messing about with like 7'9" and 11-foot clearance, as we saw in part 1, this one was a full height one. I've not found a photograph of it that was clear enough to show the height, but I believe it was 15'3". You could get a double-decker bus under it anyway. The opening ceremony consisted of the Lord Mayor of Grimsby being driven underneath it in a double-decker bus to prove the point. By 1933 they developed mechanical excavators which could dig the road out a lot quicker, and it only took 8 months for the construction work. It started in April 1933, as I said. It was due to open in January 1934, but it actually opened a month early in December 1933. Unfortunately, when the Peach Parkway was built, they decided the A46 was too important not to have a junction with it, so they filled the excavations back in again and built a level junction that we're going to see very shortly. There was a halt here as well, Weelsby Road halt, that was opened in December 1905, the same time as Hainton Street. Unlike Hainton Street, it closed temporarily in 1939 at the outbreak of war, and it never reopened. It wasn't as busy as Hainton Street, the area wasn't developed as well. Sorry, I'm just getting tangled up by Alfie again. When they actually built the halt, the area was open fields around here. There was nothing here at all apart from the crossing keeper's house. I believe they probably thought that Edward Heneage was going to continue building his terraced houses in this direction, but of course he didn't. As I said, it was developed in the 1920s eventually, and they built semi-detached houses, the residents of whom were quite well-to-do and wouldn't have made much use of public transport. So it closed temporarily in 1939 when the war broke out. And as I say, it didn't reopen. It was declared permanently closed in 1952. That's caused a bit of confusion. A couple of sources say that it reopened in 1940, but it didn't. They've just kind of assumed, because it was declared permanently closed in 1952, that it must have reopened at the same time that Hainton Street did, but that's not the case. It was temporarily closed in 1939, it remained temporarily closed for 13 years, and then they announced it would never reopen in 1952, but it remained closed throughout. So we're coming up to Weelsby Road now. And you see the site of the level crossing and then the bridge. But yeah, the train service, obviously from Hainton Street and Weelsby Road, took you round to Grimsby Town Station in Top Town. Whereas we said the Hainton Avenue tram and trolleybus route took you to Bottom Town. So I believe that's why Hainton Street survived as long. It provided a different journey opportunity. I also believe that the Great Northern wouldn't allow the trams to go across, because the trams would have taken you via the Bargate route into Top Town, and that would have threatened their traffic from Hainton Street halt. So this is a slip road where 2 houses had to be demolished to make room for it. And then this is the side of the level crossing and the bridge. That goes back towards Grimsby. And up there goes off towards Wolf, and that's where the halt was, where that white car's just going across. It could have been very different, the story of the properties around here. As I mentioned, there is the Lincolnshire Railway at Ludborough, the Heritage Steam Line. They originally had an idea when the society was set up to put the whole line back between Grimsby and Louth, and the British Railways Board gave them first refusal. They said they'd hold on to the track bed for a few years after it closed and not sell it to anybody else, to give the society a chance to raise the funds to buy it. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't buy it, they couldn't raise the money. But the council were going to build this road anyway, even if they'd left the railway in place. What they would have done is built it alongside the railway, so they would have had to demolish a lot of properties. 480 of them apparently would have had to be demolished to make room for it. But because the society couldn't raise the funds to buy it, they only had to demolish 2. So, but that could have changed the face of Grimsby completely. It's one of 2 things on this line that could. We mentioned in part 1 about the proposal to build a central station in Grimsby, to close Grimsby Town and Grimsby Dock stations and build one in between them. But that would have been in Bottom Town, so it would have had the effect of moving the town centre towards Freeman Street. And then if that had happened, and this, if the railway had survived as a preserved railway, and it had to demolish nearly 500 houses along here, it would have changed the face of this end of Grimsby as well. One curious feature of Weelsby Road, which you can see, is that there's a bend in it. There always was, even though there was nothing here when the railway was built, apart from the level crossing when it was put in. They still left the bend and they never straightened the road out. So where I'm standing, these houses, the pavement outside them would have been up on a retaining wall like we saw further back, after they put the bridge in. So the bridge would have been about 7 feet above the pavement just along here. The road would have been about 8 feet further down in its cutting. And as I said, there would have been massive retaining walls holding the pavements back. That's why the houses haven't got any driveways. They obviously would have been up in the air previously, and they've never put any driveways in, although you wouldn't want to be backing out onto this road from your drive. There's a good chance that the retaining walls are still under my feet actually. There was no need to remove them. I think they just threw some hardcore in between them and then compacted it and levelled it off. So if you drill down, you probably find that they're still there. But I'm not going to do it. Maybe that could be a new series. The Pacer Chaser digs up roads in Grimsby. Anyway, we'll just have a last quick look at the Weelsby Road and Peaks Parkway junction. So yeah, as always, thank you for joining us. Please take care, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.